All right, episode 1, season 5?
5.
Wow, season 5 of the Formed by Jesus podcast. This is your host, Pastor Trey Van Camp, and now my co-host,
Yeah.
Pastor Caleb Martinez.
Are you playing that music again this time? Or
No, you want?
I don't want it, actually. Is it one button away?
Hey, everybody.
It's so like...
Jordan's so bothered because it's a long song.
It is long, and it doesn't match the tone of what we're talking about at all.
We're going to talk about childhood wounds.
Trauma.
Let us state we are not licensed experts at this.
We're talking very surface level. What the Bible has to say about trauma and generational sin.
That's a good point. Like, we're allowed to talk about this because it's in the Bible. That's something that... We're Bible people.
That's actually something I was really nervous about with this whole series, was talking too much about things that we don't. I think it's really easy to go too far. That was clean.
Yeah, it was.
Too deep into a topic. I think there's some cursory stuff that we can really confidently cover because it's in the scriptures and things like that. But at some point you start making leaps and assumptions that we obviously don't want to do. So
yeah, I think there's a balance to that because I do think some of us haven't experienced freedom and haven't even tried to get emotionally healthy because we think, well, I'm not an expert and I can't afford an expert. Yeah. So I'll just be stuck in my dysfunction forever.
Yeah. Well, that's what we talked about yesterday too. There's because the lie, I think the surface level version of our faith that we all want and buy into is this idea that you just pray, do the basic sort of bread and butter practices, read your Bible, go to church, give when you can. Evangelical practices, yeah. And everything else will generally get better for you as you grow and mature. And sanctification is just like the byproduct of you just kind of doing that. And those are all great things.
You can't do it without them, but
Right.
We're saying there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, I think a lot of us hit walls and hit blocks in our relationships with others. Patterns and addictions we can't break free from because there's parts of our lives we haven't opened up to God yet and allowed him to heal and to confront, to convict, and then heal, which is kind of the thesis of this whole peacemaking series, I think.
You want to repeat the thesis then? What is the thesis?
The thesis, put in the most unsuccinct way possible, is that we all have emotional baggage. We carry woundings, we carry wickedness, we carry hurts, parts of our lives, patterns, addictions, sins that we can't break free from all of our lives. They're deep-rooted sins that just prayer and going to church won't get rid of. That stuff won't get rid of those sins in your life. And usually for a lot of us, it's because there are parts of our lives that we haven't opened up to God yet. We haven't allowed God to convict us of, confront. And so the practice of peacemaking is a practice of opening those parts of our lives up to God and to others in community and allowing God to convict and then heal those areas.
Yeah, I was telling somebody this.
I disagree.
It was the huddle that we had yesterday. But another way to describe this peacemaking practice, at least how we're trying to aim at it, is that prayer, Lord, open my heart to trust your love. Mm-hmm. And I think we're able to be people of peace and bring peace to where we are. Because so much of this is just not believing in God's love for us. I'm actually going to share this quote next Sunday, but for some reason I feel like it's helpful to talk about now. Our fear of bringing secrets and sin into the light, however, drives many people to prefer the illusion that if they don't think about it, it somehow goes away. That's kind of what we're saying, right? Like, oh, let's just come to church. Let's not even talk about it, really address it, and it'll go away. It doesn't. And then this is just the line of all lines. This is by Pete Scazzaro, page 89, in the second edition of The Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. Unhealed wounds open us up to habitual sin against God and others.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to get after.
Yeah.
So we're starting with these first couple weeks, unhealed wounds, so that we can really get down to the bottom of how we are habitually sinning against God and others and what brings division, chaos, what breaks the peace. It's sin.
Yeah. And I think it's helpful too when you frame this all within the context of making friends, which is the direction we're going as a church this year, because a lot of us hit these roadblocks. Like you mentioned in your intro, we have friendships that only last 3 to 5 years was the stat, and I think a lot of it as you said, was because these patterns come up. Things that we've kind of pushed down rise to the surface, ways of handling people. We get turned off by certain people because of the way our past or whatever has affected us. And we kind of repeat these generational cycles of sinful dealings with people. So if our goal is to make friends and love other people through the practice of hospitality, peacemaking is a way to address a lot of the issues that make that hard for us.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to have people over for dinner that you like, but it's hard to practice reconciliation with like the person in your family who hurt you long ago that you feel God convicting you to seek reconciliation with. Peacemaking is our way of trying to help others do that.
And eventually the dinner table will always get awkward.
Yeah.
So like it's people you enjoy at first, and then you live life long enough and they become, so the opening line, and maybe we'll read the intro after this, the overview that you created. But most of us have the desire to make friendships, but have never acquired the tool belt necessary to maintain friendships. And I still feel that. Like, I don't think anybody desires broken friendships. I don't think people desire, I don't know the data on this, but I'm pretty sure, I guess from, what do you call it? Just what people say. The typical window for a church member is like 3 years. You're out of church for 3 years and then you move on. I've heard some pastors mention how their whole discipleship formula is just a 3-year window because they know in 3 years they're going to have a whole nother congregation. And ironically, our Formed by Jesus stuff is a 3-year window. It's us being smart, I guess. But would you like to either add context to that, or do you want to read the overview?
Yeah, well, let's give our working definition of peacemaking. I think that'd be helpful. So,
do you have it memorized?
I'm going to try to do it now.
I haven't memorized, but go.
So the practice of peacemaking is, I know what the 4 are, but I forgot your exact verbiage coming up to it. But essentially, we've broken up the practice of peacemaking into 4 elements. So it's
doing the hard work.
Doing the hard work. That was a main point
doing
too.
The hard work of.
The hard work of forgiving your past, forging new patterns, framing your pain in order
to
fulfill God's purpose, your purpose of loving God and loving others.
Boom. We took out we just said loving God and others.
Loving God. Was that an Emily move?
It was an Emily move.
Yeah,
Emily, our communication director, was like, hey, you're
redundant.
repeating words here. This is already a really long sentence.
It is. It's like never mind. I won't bring that up.
Okay.
But yeah, so week 1 was all about the first step, which I think makes sense. Maybe we could talk about that. I don't know why we started with this, but forgiving your past. And so here's what yesterday was all about. All of us are shaped by our past. Where we come from, who we come from, and the way we were raised all shape who we are today in profound ways. Most of us have a basic awareness of our family of origin, but few of us have done the hard work of learning about our past to better understand who we are today. As a result, all of us unknowingly transmit the same narratives, patterns, pains, and expectations as our family before us. To make peace with our past is to return to an ancient tradition from the scriptures. Throughout the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, God tells his people to remember where they've come from, what God has saved them from, and the promises he has made. Making peace with our past means we must forgive our past. We must take intentional time to see where we come from. We learn about our family of origin to better understand where our behaviors and patterns come from, both good and bad. But most importantly, we look back in order to recognize God's providence and care for us in our lives. By recognizing both positives and negatives in our past, we're able to see how God has used our family of origin to shape who we are.
Not long at all.
Yeah, that was a wordy one because I wrote it for the guide.
Yeah.
So I had to take out.
I knew
more
you
space.
copy-pasted from the guide.
Yep.
Wonderful. Wonderful. In many ways, you directed this series because you created the guide before we fully filled out. It was
What? No. We did
This
it
is what
all
always
months
happens.
before.
Don't you love in the huddles? Everyone's like, we just prayed for Pastor Caleb and Trey as they created this sermon together this week.
Yeah, do they think we co-write them? There's a collaborative nature to it to some extent.
Absolutely.
I think.
But we totally we've put off some sort of vibe that like we're just together, just like putting everything.
Even yesterday, people were pointing that out. They were like, you guys, it's a weird
I think it's
co-pastor
because
thing.
you were clearly smarter than me. So they're like, I think Caleb had a hand in this one.
I don't think so. I think anytime it rhymes, it's like, that's Trey.
Yes.
Anytime it's a paragraph sentence, they're like, that's Caleb.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the I sum it up. Like
Yeah,
I'm the
yeah.
one who I'm the one that came up with the you were like, make peace with your past, your patterns, your
Pain,
and your purpose.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. And then I was like, let's say forgiving,
Yeah. Yeah.
forging, framing, fulfilling.
That was the most
fulfilling
I've
to me.
ever alliterated in my life.
Yes. Yeah. And I had to make it better. Anyways. Okay. So, where do you want to start? So, yeah, where do you want to start? Because I've already preached this sermon.
Yeah,
So.
I guess you can answer this if you want, but why start with forgiving your past? Why in your mind, is that a good first place to go?
I think we have to remember we're gospel people. And so much of the gospel is about forgiveness. And I know we love to say it's not just about being forgiven by Jesus, but formed by Jesus. But man, you can't skip the forgiveness part. And it just seemed like that was such an emphasis when Jesus was talking about relationships. He'd always point to forgiveness. So I think the primacy of Jesus using forgiveness in the context of relationships is why we had to start there. But also as I think through, because week 1 is forgiving the past. Next week is starting to be more action-oriented, like how do we make a new future? You can't really walk into your future because we are all products of our past. And then take the step further. I think the secular world would say, yes, you need to know your past. You need to name your past. What makes us gospel people is, okay, we can't just name it. We have to forgive it to be set free from it. And that actually was really helpful for me this past week. I was just in my own prayer time, and maybe suggest this to all of our listeners, and maybe especially as we, after week 4 do this, but I actually created a prayer rhythm using those 4 things. So I was like, okay, forgiving my past. So for a while, I just talked to God about asking forgiveness and forgiving myself of my past, which I want us to talk about. Like, oh, okay, Jesus, if you've forgiven it, all of this sin has already been punished. I don't need to punish myself anymore. There's no condemnation anymore. And then kind of going through some of my childhood and not just family tree, but just relational stuff that's been really sad to me. I had to just walk, and on my prayer walk, forgive them. And it's amazing how before there's been moments in my life where I can name to you how that person hurt me. And then I think I would try to find peace by going, they were ignorant, or, they have their issues. So that's why their issues hurt me. Hurt people hurt people. And you think that gives you like, okay, I'm better now, but it's not. Like we really need to forgive in order to move forward. I just feel like that's such a consistent theme in the Bible. And if you see people when they don't forgive, if they don't forgive their past, they will relive it and re-give it.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, on a practical level too, I think the older you get, at least this is true of, I think, where I'm at, there's all of us have things about us that we don't like. Yeah. And there's for a long time, I think you kind of resist the things that you don't like about yourself. So growing up, there were things that I didn't like about myself, just my personality and my preferences and things like that. And then over time, you learn to kind of make peace with that. But I think part of making peace with who you really are naturally involves like an awareness. You realize like, oh, I didn't realize I'm this way because my family is this way, or because I had this thing happen to me or whatever. And so in any self-reflective practice or emotional health, focus that we go through is going to have to deal with at some point why you are the way that you are. And all of us, like I said, we're all shaped by, we're a product of our past. We're all shaped by things that were completely out of our control. Good and bad. Yeah, good and in good ways and bad ways. And then I'm reminded throughout the scriptures about how often God, especially throughout the Old Testament, the one of the primary ways that God was trying to guide his people away from giving into the anxiety and the sinfulness of the nations around them was to remember. So built within their calendar were these festivals where they would remember significant acts that God had saved them from. Constantly, in Deuteronomy, remember the Lord your God. Psalm, I think 145, David says, I will remember all that you've done for me. 143, verse 5, I remember the days of old. I meditate on all you have done. I reflect on the work of your hands. This practice of forgiving your past means acknowledging where you come from and forgiving, the pain that you carry from people who've hurt you, but also remembering that God has still brought you to this point, which is a key, I think, that alone is a key practice.
And if we're made in the image of God, Jesus, we're Trinitarian here, but God the Father describes himself and saying one key way he describes himself in Exodus 34, 6-7, we learned is that he is forgiving. So if we're made in his image, we're called to be like him. Forgiveness should be very high on top of the order. I think we don't talk about forgiveness enough, probably in the context of relational forgiveness with others. That Matthew 6 passage is scary. If you forgive others, God in heaven will forgive you. But if you don't, you will not be forgiven. I don't think we take the weight of that passage serious enough.
Yeah, in your study, what is Jesus actually saying there? Because there's a bad way, which you mentioned on Sunday, to interpret that, where you say like you can lose your salvation if you don't forgive others. But that's clearly not what Jesus is saying.
Yeah, I think it is. So in my mind, so a lot of people were kind of dancing around it, commentators, because it's really scary because it can be, like you just said, easily misinterpreted. Essentially, the argument was always, man, if you're actually genuinely saved and you were given that warning, like, hey, just so you know, if you don't forgive others, you're not forgiven, that will make you go, oh my gosh, yes. Let me reflect on how much I've been forgiven. Now I have the power and ability through the Spirit to forgive others. So in my mind, it's more... if you've been warned and given like this verse and say you need to forgive and you still don't forgive, then you should tremble and be terrified because maybe you were never forgiven in the first place. So the argument is that's bearing fruit. Like if you are an apple tree, you will bear apples. So if you are a Christian, you will give forgiveness. So it should be a great caution or a warning. If there's somebody in your life that you cannot forgive, you need to first, I would say step one, meditate, write down all the sins you've committed against God and how he's forgiven you. And if you still don't have the capacity to forgive whoever that person is, you need to ask for forgiveness from the Lord and get saved, because there's a misunderstanding of your sin and what Jesus did with it on the cross. So the parable in Matthew 18 that Jesus gives right after, we're not doing that in the guide, right? Matthew 18. You're doing Luke 7, 36.
Right. Yeah.
So in Matthew 18, what's pretty fascinating about the parable is this guy, what's crazy about the how much this guy owes the guy, sorry, terrible, is like trillions of dollars. So it's more money than anybody has today. Even someone like a Elon Musk or a Bill Gates, like this is trillions when you do the math because we don't know what is 20,000 talents? You know,
Right.
like what does
What's
that
a
even
talent?
mean? Yeah. So for them though, it's like, no, this is trillions of dollars. And he was forgiven. So it's like, cool. So then this guy turns around and goes, you owe me $10, you owe me $20. And so he throws all these people in prison. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. He was just forgiven trillions of debt. He should say everybody's wiped clean. So the point of the story should be, that makes no sense. Exactly. You were owing trillions of dollars and you were forgiven. Of course, you're going to forgive other people. So Jesus is using hyperbole. He's showing just this is the silliest story. And it should be silly to us if we don't forgive. Is there any lack of clarity there?
No, that makes sense. Yeah. I don't want people to go read that passage and then have this fear that like, you know,
But sometimes that fear is okay.
which is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Like allow that fear to drive you to the cross. What have I been forgiven of? Wow. And that's the Luke 7:36 thing that you're going to ask people this week to meditate on. When you truly meditate on how much you've been forgiven, of course you forgive. And so, yeah, I think it's just a great, again, a lot of this peacemaking is self-awareness and realizing how much we have been forgiven. Hopefully this brings us to the cross at every moment. I want to add this, though, because I said we don't talk about forgiveness enough in our culture. I think we think a lot about vertical, but not horizontal. A great paradigm that's helped me in that Sacred Fire book by Ronald Rohrheiser is the first half of life, and I think most preachers preach to this, is the battle with lust, with passions. But the second half of life is the battle with resentment and bitterness and anger. And I don't know if we've given our people enough tools to battle with that. It's that whole parable the monk said, or I think it's a monk, in the first half of life, he said, I wrestled with the devil and I hope to win. But in the second half of life, I wrestled with God and I hope to lose. So much of it is like, the younger brother versus the older brother. Forgiveness is so key. And I think one reason why we see people in the second half of life really begin to just be not happy, wholesome people is because there's something in their past they haven't forgiven. And it's often a relationship, but it's also their dreams. it's like resentment. Like, I thought this would happen in my life. I thought I would make this much. I didn't think I'd be poor still at age 67. Those things, man, keep so many people from freedom.
Which we're going to cover. That's the last week.
Framing pain,
Framing pain and fulfilling your purpose. It's a big part of that, dealing with those disappointments. Yeah, I think there's a lot about, because everybody, I feel like I'm trying to address this in the guide that we write. But there's a fear that I have that people are, because we all do this. There's a willingness to forgive. Like, we all have somebody or some pain. Most of us have somebody in our lives that's hurt us too much that, like, you're thinking, well, of course I can forgive. I mean, not that person, but I can forgive everyone, that kind of thing. And I think what we're trying to do is give people a way forward to where you can actually fathom what it would look like to be reconciled with others on that capacity. And part of this is so, like, it feels so hard to do because culturally we're in this, pseudo psychological self-love movement of cutting out toxic people and things like that, which again,
boundaries are great.
We always give the caveat. Yeah, boundaries are great. But what if your boundaries are just a scapegoat for you ignoring what God is calling you to do?
And what if you're the problem?
And what if you're the problem too? Yeah. Like, there's no way.
That's why it's so hard to preach, because it's like this can be misinterpreted for certain people need to hear this. Other people need to hear the exact opposite. Some of you need boundaries. Some of you're the reason why people need boundaries. That's why we want together groups. That's why we want people really processing this in their own life and self-reflection, because this message can shoot 1,000 different ways. On that key of forgiveness, we mentioned on Sunday, forgiveness is an action well before it's an affection. What are some of your further thoughts on that idea? I remember I kind of learned that idea from Tim Keller many years ago, and that was transformative for me.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up too, that there's, I think what we're trying to do when we talk about forgiveness is put the, like, onus of responsibility back on you as the person extending forgiveness. When a lot of times, I think when we think of forgiveness, we think that it has to be accompanied by full restoration of a relationship, reconciliation. You have to get something in return, and then it's going to make you feel better. And what we're saying is you have to, like, do the thing first. You have to take ownership of whatever you can, because you are in complete control of, like, what you are forgiving them for, and your ability to find freedom from that is dependent on you, not them.
Not how they respond.
Not how they respond or whether they apologize or whatever.
I had that this last week. I apologized to somebody, and I hoped that they would apologize back, and they didn't. They're like, just so you know, I don't feel bad about this at all.
Yeah.
And I remember it hurting him, but then I also remembered me and you had a conversation 2 days before. It's not a real apology if you're doing it to also hear it back. So I just remember taking it in and going, okay, that's fine. Like, that's where you're at. I disagree, but man, there's grace and there's mercy, and I still do forgive you for that thing, even though maybe you don't feel bad for doing it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a helpful, mature thing to do as well. And I think the only way we can do that is the Holy Spirit. I want to constantly remind us of that.
Right.
This is a gospel-centered practice. Without the work of the Holy Spirit, without his favor on our life, without him renewing our minds and giving us new hearts, this practice is impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. So to forgive is an action that, and it's like a lot of the things
It
we
like
talk
makes
about.
space for the grace of God.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the practices we talk about are actions before they're, what's the phrase you use?
So I said forgiveness is an action well before it's an affection.
An affection, right. So you don't wait to read your Bible until you feel the affection for God. You read the Bible as an action first, and the affection follows.
It really does.
It's the same
Most
thing.
of the time.
Yeah. Sabbath, scripture, simplicity, all of these things we've talked about, hospitality, the desire for it, which everyone shared in a lot of the testimonies with hospitality. It's this idea that, like, the first time you do it, it's an action. It feels like a workout. It's hard. But the more you do it, the more you grow to love it, because you find yourself energized by it. Well, I think forgiveness works the same way. Yeah.
Sin works the same way. It's often an action before it's an affection to some degree. So like, even like when I'm trying to give an easy example here. Let's say like eating. So
Sinful.
like right. I can't believe that. So I fasted for 40 days for Lent. And then it was hard for me to eat more than a meal a day after that. But after I was like, no, I'm going to eat lunch. I didn't want to eat lunch, but I was like, I'm going to eat lunch, which is so dumb. I don't know why I did that. And now it became like, I have to have like 3 days of forcing myself. I'm going to have lunch. Now I can't survive without lunch. So like doing a repeated behavior makes it where you all of a sudden are dependent on it. So I want us to realize it's not just the good stuff. That's also like the bad stuff. Like the whole idea of shopping, like, oh, you do need jeans, but then you think after you've did that, well, I need boots with that. And now it becomes into this consumerism thing that you didn't need. Does that make sense? So often like I know the root of sin is evil desire. Like, so, but we feed into those desires, and what does the scripture say? Like, and then we get pregnant and it gives birth to death. Like there's something about how feeding into it, it's like a monster. When we feed it, it gets bigger and bigger.
Everything is progressive. So, and it stacks on top of itself. Like sin, what starts with one bite of forbidden fruit turns into genocide,
killing your brother,
polygamy and murder and all these things that we see now.
And now we just got canceled on YouTube.
Well, I think there's probably like, I wonder if, and I don't know, I mean, this is where I'm dipping into territory I have no business dipping into, but some kind of like neuroplasticity element to it, where you're the habits that you're forming, you always adapt to what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so if you adapt to sin, or if you participate in sin, your body, your mind, your emotions, your affections are going to adapt to sin. And what we're saying is you can apply that principle to forgiveness, to where you do it. And the way you phrased it was really helpful too. It's a one-time event and a continual process, which we talk about in the guide too. A moment in a marathon, where there's the moment, the action of it, and then the continual process of your inner spiritual, emotional, and mental life adapting to those daily decisions. So yeah.
Have you had, I don't know if I should ask this.
Do it. This isn't live.
Have you had that kind of opportunity in your life? Because I mentioned a story in mine where it had to be an action first, and you had to forgive this person for a long time, and then finally you were like, oh, like, because honestly, before a few years ago, I didn't have one because nobody really hurt me that bad. You know what I'm saying?
Nobody's hurt me that bad either, Trey, and there's a reason for that. Or
is there another practice? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, the easy example is like working out, which isn't a real example. I mean, it's not like I'm a fitness expert. I go through seasons of like working out really intensely, but it starts like that. Where I realize like I need to do this. I work out once and it's awful. And then for like 3 or 4 months, I like depend on it so much. But I think I would say I'm probably in that process. But one thing I've noticed not getting into details, but my family of origin, I'm realizing more recently, have shaped who I am today. So it's no secret, I think, to people listening, that I of the two of us, or of maybe any normal person in general, I'm very emotionally detached from people. Relationships
I'm really jealous.
Yeah, which works out great in ministry for some things and really poorly for other things. I compartmentalize really well, and I can kind of disassociate my work life, my spiritual life, my personal, all of those things. But what that's done is it's made it really hard for me to be a part of real, genuine relationships. Vulnerability is hard for me, not because it's hard. I mean, it is hard, but it's hard just because I don't have those people to be vulnerable with. And so through the hospitality practice, there have definitely been times where it's taken like the rote discipline of putting something in my schedule, sticking to it, and not letting, or Shelby not letting me cancel or something like that.
Right.
And my hope is that by the end of this year, I will be a little bit more emotionally available and relational with the people that I'm in community with. So I don't know if that's a good example, but it's something. You're like, no.
I forgot the question.
Well, you asked about, the action before affection.
Oh, okay.
But I think
I'm here confused on how we got here.
No, it's proximity too. So like if my desire.
You say that, but you've been a part of our community for 7 years. So
I've been a part of it, but I don't have like.
You're like, I don't like it.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like when I think of like, I don't know if I want to say this. People, I don't know, whatever.
No, I think there's been and we can talk about this a little bit. There has been, you're better at, I think there is a healthy, especially depending on the person. Some people, I think most people, for us specifically, this is what's unique about pastors. They need you to be their pastor, not their best friend. It's the same kind of paradigm of parenting. And we're not saying we're parenting these people, but Paul compares and contrasts parenting with pastoring.
Yeah.
And that's why like pastors have to be good parents. Like if you can't manage your own household, how can you manage the household of God? So I think sometimes my mistake is like, oh, I'm going to help people by being their best bud. And really what they needed is a pastor that can be friendly, but that doesn't always mean best friend. And that makes little sense to me. It really makes sense for parenting. Like I love my kids and I'm so friendly with them and I have their back more than anything, but I'm not their best friend. There's times where I have to just say it like it is. So there is a bit of there's a weird distance. I don't want to say, you know what I'm saying?
No, but
It's an understanding of the relationship, I guess.
yeah, the dynamic is there. The dynamic has to be defined differently. But I would say the flip side of that, though, is you gain, and this is a really mechanical way of saying this, which just betrays where my mind goes, but you gain relational capital with people through your proximity to them and your relational, like the hangouts and the random things where there is no pastoral conversation, then enables you get to, that's an investment. And you get a return on that later when you have the capacity to speak in. So you think of
That's
your
true.
kids, for example, like if your dad, authoritarian all the time and you never play games with them, you never take them or do anything fun, everything has to be a lesson or a correction or a discipline, then at some point they're going to be
When
like,
stuff hits the fan, I'm not going to him.
yeah, exactly. So I think pastorally,
Man, what a hard balance. I think maybe the healthier thing, or maybe to balance those things, is to have the wisdom of going, hey, right now, I'm your pastor. Let's have this conversation. Right? Like maybe help set up an environment.
yeah,
I don't know.
This is a different conversation.
These are things, yeah,
These are things we're wrestling with.
that we've
But
been
even
wrestling with.
as I-
We're doing a whole series on making friends and loving other people. And it's like, there's a lot of talk and chatter about how do pastors do that?
Yeah, what's our obligation, or to what capacity can we be friends, real friends?
When can our friendship be malpractice? Like when can
Yeah.
it be actually hurtful to people in a weird way?
Yeah, like the doctor who won't operate on his kids, kind of a thing. Like there's wisdom there. But I think as I'm looking back at my life, a lot of the sins that I'm now becoming more aware of are less of like the blatant things that I've been wrestling with, in younger stages of my life, and more like the deep rooted bitterness that comes from people that I don't like or whatever. And
Yeah.
even like the friends that I've made now that I am close to, or as close to as I can be, I maybe just didn't like them at first. And it's that realization that like, no, God has called me here. I clearly don't have any better options. So I have to take the action of being in proximity to them. And then the byproduct of that is the affection follows.
Yeah, I would say too, one of my best friends from college, I hung out with him for 2 years. Didn't love him. Like
Yeah.
he was like in the crew.
Yeah.
And I was always like, man, we don't relate on any level. Like he was like Comic-Con kind of guy.
Oh.
And like, Lord of the Rings, like could speak Elvish, that kind of stuff. And a lot like you. But
There are two types of, that's another conversation. Shelby was talking to me about this. There's two kinds of these types of fans, and that is one kind, and I am not that kind.
yeah. But now we're like best friends, and I was texting him yesterday, but it was the action before the affection. We just did enough life where we were bonded because of Christ. But like, man, I love him to death. And I really like how he's totally different than me, gives me totally different perspectives on life. So that's just interesting that I think that with friendship is true too. The action comes well before the affection often.
Any practice of abstinence too, which we'll cover fasting next year. I think that's a similar thing where nobody imagines it's there, or even like, a practice of abstinence, like abstaining from social media or media in general or whatever, for me has always been like, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to, commit to this.
I don't want to do it, but I love the vision of who I will become when I do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's the other part I wanted to add. So we mentioned use mirrors, not microscopes. So make sure you're looking at your own life, the log in your own eye before you look at the speck in your brother's. But then the other one is God uses moments and marathons. But I think for the marathon, you need community. Like you cannot sustain yourself in this process of healing. I've been hearing this line a lot in a lot of the books I read and preparing for this. Like, yes, relationships are what brought the worst pain in our life, but it also is what brings the most healing. You gotta have friends. Like this is a part of it. We're using the word friends. Biblical word would be like relationships, community, brothers and sisters. I think friends kind of helps people because I think I don't know, in my mind, it's almost the way we use the word friends. Most people would assume, like, if you ask somebody, do you have community? Yeah, I have community. Do you have friends? I don't know. Would you agree to that? You know what I'm saying? Like, for some reason in my mind, friends, like, feels deeper than, like, oh, I have, like, a church family.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a while ago, the difference between, like, a friend and an acquaintance, or a friend and a companion or something like that. Like, there's friendship, which is, like, general acquaintance, but, like, a companion is someone that, like, is a part of your community that you're friends with, but you're doing something together. There's a accountability, things like that.
But in your mind, how can they help with the marathon?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, a lot of it goes back to the vulnerability stuff. So with the marathon, we talked about this last time or last series. The moment opposition hits, all of us are inclined to bail or course correct or change direction or whatever. So in the practice of peacemaking, all of us are going to face internal resistance. In examining your past and forgiving your past and things like that, you're going to come up across wounds that are really tough to forgive, people that you know God is calling you to forgive that you just can't do it. But if you have a group of friends that are committed to genuine friends who want you to become the person that you want to be,
Right.
who are able to keep you and encourage you and give you what you need to hear.
The wounds of a friend versus the kiss of an enemy.
Yeah, exactly. I think that can be the difference that keeps someone from not engaging and not growing or not breaking free from whatever it is they're trying to break free from.
Yeah, I have some friends in my life that like we are totally polar opposites, but not only that, like sometimes theologically it's like, bro, I just can't see where you're coming from. But goodness gracious, they have helped me in the marathon of life and helped speak life into me in the right moment. And so I think it's really good to have that kind of community where sometimes we just need a friend to say what you're doing is valuable and keep going, like persevere. I think we also need friends in life, or maybe not even friends, but mentors. Oh, I'm going to keep going because I see the vision of who I can become in this person. And I want to, this is worth it if I can become like him. So that's the beauty of, what is it, in Titus, the older teaching the younger. Like, I think there should be that richness, a multi-generational, not just because it makes the church website photo look nice. It's, like people have kind of achieved that serenity that we long for. So like, man, the older people who have done that gives me the inspiration to say, you know what, this morning I'm saying no to my phone again and I'm getting in the scriptures. Like, we need that vision. And so, yeah, they really help in the marathon of life of just leaning on a brother. Think of the illustration with Moses holding up the staff. He had to have Aaron, and who was the other one?
I don't remember.
Hur? Does that even make sense?
I don't know.
Hur? Yeah. So, but two guys like helping him
Holding his
hold the
arms up,
staff.
yeah.
And every time they did that, they would win the war. They were fighting with victory. And every time it fell down. So we need those people in our life. And I think it's really good. Kind of going back to the January series of how to make friends and love other people. You have the foxhole friend, you have the encourager. Like, we need all sorts of different types of people, but we need to be those different types of people for them as well. Is there any other last thoughts? I feel like I had a really good one, but I forgot to write it down, so now it's lost. Do you agree with the idea if we don't forgive our past, we will relive it and re-give it?
Yeah, I think there's we're not making blanket sort of generalizations well, yes, I agree generally. I think that you are more likely to either repeat exactly the same patterns and traditions of your family narratives, things like that, or you're likely to overreact in the opposite way.
But still bring hurt.
Yeah. So we are all affected, and the way that we re-give those sin patterns and relive them and transmit them to others looks different. But there is a tendency that we all have that very few of us are actually aware of to like repeat the same tendencies of our forefathers and foremothers and things like that.
And I think another side to that is a lot of us, from when I've talked to people, we usually pick one parent that we're like most upset with.
Yeah.
It's like, man, dad was fine, but my mom. Or, yeah, mom was great. It's my dad. And so I think, and it's okay, we tend to have like a blindness maybe towards your mom's own issues. And so you're like, I just am not going to be like my dad. But you're still perpetuating your family tree. It's just the other side of that tree, you know, because often opposites attract. Typically, a lot of times marriage partners, they are kind of different. So sometimes we don't have the awareness like, oh, I thought I wasn't perpetuating. I was so focused on not perpetuating that side. I perpetuated the other. So I think what we see in Genesis is you have to deal with it. What's that line? If you don't deal with your pain, you will distribute it. Or if you don't transform it, you will transmit it.
Yeah.
So to land the plane here, we're really hoping our people will do the genogram this week.
Yeah.
Any other, because I had to like fly through it on Sunday because, man, that clock on Sunday was going by fast. Because I was like, I'm not even in Matthew yet.
Yeah.
And there's 8 minutes left on this clock.
Yeah.
That was not fun. So what are we hoping? just any kind of thoughts on the genogram. I think it will take. Do you expect them to do it during group, or like, hey, let's talk about it and get ready to do it after group?
No,
I think
I
this is a
think-
good clarification. I think it's on the guy, but let's talk about it.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, yeah, I would recommend talking about it in group and then setting aside a time on your own to do it later throughout the week. Because it takes a little bit of reflection, and we've done it before at our spiritual formation retreats and things like that. And it takes a while. I mean, we have time at those retreats in that context to do it in the moment, but, the degree,
And people always cry.
yeah, there's always tears. So get ready for that. How, I guess the level of depth that you go is up to you. So, I don't think you need to go. I think that the instructions on the guide are just to start with your grandparents, because that's generally what we have the most information and awareness on. You can go further if you want. You can adapt it as you want. But I think the key thing is to not just make the family tree, but to think deeply about personality traits. And I would spend a lot of time if you have to emphasize one thing to kind of write down and reflect on. I would encourage the narratives. I think that's been the most powerful for people to break
Seems the
free
most
from.
difficult to think of off the bat too.
Yeah, exactly. So narratives about, work life. Like if your dad was a workaholic, you might not know it, but the way that you view work is if you don't do this work of like going back to look at the narratives of workaholism in your family, you're not going to have a very robust understanding of like what it means to work and cultivate and do good and things like that. It's going to be warped and limited by your experience. So
Yeah.
money, relationships, all of those come from these narratives that our families pass down unintentionally to us.
I think
Or
I have,
intentionally.
because we've been trying to wrestle through how can we give examples without ratting out our family, and every family is dysfunctional. I think I have a good example looking at my family tree and understanding something. Again, I've shared this Sunday, I'm fourth generation pastor. So with that, automatically in my mind is image. You're going to constantly struggle, and it's a balance because in order to faithfully serve your people, you can't be bringing all your problems to your flock, so there's a way by which image can be healthy as long as you have community to be real and honest with. So I want to make sure I preface that. But I think it's so silly how it really does seep into your bones. Bro, since like first grade, I could not see. I had no vision.
Oh yeah.
So I would like sit in the very front to barely see the whiteboard. My coach would say, how come you close your eyes every time you shoot a three? It's like, bro, I was squinting. I couldn't see the hoop. So I was playing baseball, basketball, all this stuff, living life, not seeing. And I could never admit that I can't see. Like I knew I couldn't. And so like in third grade, I remember Mrs. Wellick, she was like, I think you need, because when I would read, I would bring it all the way up to my face. You need to go to the eye doctor. And I'd be like, oh, we already went. So it was to my detriment. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was missing out on, but I just could not admit that I was flawed,
Interesting.
and so,
Let's unpack that. I'm just kidding.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'll pay you after. So then finally, the end of sixth grade comes and I'm like, okay. And this is image help. I go, I need to be better at sports. What if my vision was better? Could I be better? So I finally went to the eye doctor. And I had no idea what I was missing out on. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, you can see the leaves on the tree. Like, life was so good. But that pattern of like, I can't look weak, like kept me from really enjoying freedom. I feel like I'm going to use that as a sermon illustration for this next Sunday. I'm forging new patterns, but that's just an idea that I had in my mind. Like, oh, what a small thing. Like my parents would have never said, hey, even if you can't see, don't admit it.
Right. Yeah. Where did that come from? What was the narrative?
In my mind, it's don't be weak.
Like
I don't
strong leaders don't have weakness, kind of a thing.
Exactly.
Like if you
I come from like a long line of like influential leader, big personality. And so I guess in my mind, it's like, I can't ever like, man, to measure up, I have to be good at everything I do.
And that's a good example of doing, like looking at the narrative as well. So that's not something you intentionally thought like, oh, I need to, but you recognize like that the time it takes for you to sit down and be like, why did I feel like I couldn't?
I never connected those dots until I did the genogram. I thought it through.
Yeah. So that's what the genogram is. It's not going to answer all your questions or heal all your wounds, but it is a tool to help you maybe hopefully unlock some of these things that you've been dealing with.
And let me give a disclaimer from all the experts that I've read from. Be careful. Don't do this genogram alone in isolation and like get caught up. Like it's good to process this stuff out loud, because what it can do is, again, actually feed your bitterness towards family. It can make you feel trapped and condemned. So you need to bring the gospel to this conversation. You need other friends to remind you, man, there are still good things in your family and all that. So I think there can be a way where this can be destructive if you do it in isolation with the spirit of negativity and not forgiveness. And so I just think inviting other mature disciples into this journey will help you make sure that you get the most out of this in a beneficial way.
Yeah. So I guess for the guide next week, a big part of it. So do the genogram or some interact with it to some extent, because if you're in a together group at our church, because if you, I mean, a big part of the guide next week, the first part is going to be reflecting on that and giving other people the chance to speak into that and say like, well, here's what I see in you. Here's how you're not, that kind of thing. So if you don't do it, then no one can speak life into you, and you don't want that.
Yes.
So
Good call. All right. Thank you, guys. Episode 1, season 5 is now in the books. Grace and peace to you, and we'll see you next week.